If you've spent enough time in the blockchain space, you've probably felt it at some point. A quiet frustration that's hard to put into words. On the surface, everything looks like progress. Faster chains, cheaper fees, more protocols, more tokens, more promises. And yet, when you step back, something feels off. Despite all this innovation, blockchain still struggles to feel truly usable for everyday people. Transactions fail, wallets feel intimidating, networks slow down precisely when demand increases. It's as if the technology keeps running ahead of itself, leaving real users behind. This is the environment into which Sui was born, not as a reaction to market hype, but as a response to a deeper structural problem that has followed blockchain since its early days. Most existing networks were not designed for scale from the ground up. They were built for security and decentralization first, then forced to evolve under the pressure of real-world usage. Over time, layers of complexity were added, roll-ups, bridges, sidechains, each solving one issue while quietly introducing another. What we have today is a fragmented ecosystem that works, but only if you already know how to navigate it. At the heart of the issue is a design philosophy that treats every transaction as if it must pass through the same narrow bottleneck. No matter how simple the action, the entire network often needs to agree on the order in which it happens. This approach made sense when blockchains were small, experimental systems. But in a world where millions of users are expected to interact simultaneously, it becomes a serious limitation. Speed suffers, fees rise, and the user experience degrades in ways that feel fundamentally at odds with the idea of a global open network. Sui enters this conversation with a different question. Instead of asking how to optimize existing models, it asks whether those models were ever the right foundation to begin with. This question did not come from a group of developers chasing the next trend, but from a team that had already confronted these problems at an unprecedented scale. The core contributors behind Sui are from Miston Labs, a group of engineers and researchers who previously worked on Diem, the blockchain initiative originally backed by Meta. Whatever one thinks about Diem as a project, it forced its architects to think seriously about performance, security, and usability at the level of billions of potential users. When Diem was shut down, the ideas didn't disappear. They evolved. Sui represents a continuation of that line of thinking, freed from the constraints of a corporate-backed stablecoin project and refocused on building a general-purpose blockchain. From the very beginning, the goal was not to create another layer one competing on marketing narratives, but to rethink how a blockchain should behave if it were truly meant to support real-world applications at scale. One of the most striking aspects of Sui's origin story is its refusal to accept trade-offs that the industry has normalized. In many discussions, users are told they must choose between decentralization and performance, or between security and usability. Sui challenges this mindset by treating those trade-offs as symptoms of outdated design rather than unavoidable truths. The project starts from the assumption that blockchain infrastructure should feel invisible to the user, just as the internet does today. People don't need to understand how TCP/IP works to send a message. In the same way, Sui envisions a future where users don't need to think about gas fees, transaction ordering, or network congestion just to interact with an application. This perspective naturally leads to a different set of priorities. Instead of focusing solely on throughput metrics or headline transaction speeds, Sui is concerned with latency, responsiveness, and composability in real-time environments. These are qualities that matter deeply for applications like gaming, social platforms, and interactive digital experiences, areas where traditional blockchains have consistently fallen short. In this sense, Sui is less about replacing existing financial infrastructure and more about expanding what blockchain can be used for in the first place. But it would be a mistake to view Sui purely as a technical experiment. Its emergence also reflects a broader shift in how the industry is thinking about long-term value. After multiple market cycles, it has become clear that not every chain needs to do everything. What matters is clarity of purpose. Sui's purpose is rooted in the belief that mass adoption will not come from abstract narratives, but from products that people genuinely enjoy using. And that requires a foundation built with users, not just validators or developers in mind. As we move deeper into this analysis, it's important to keep this context in focus. SUI is not trying to win a race defined by yesterday's assumptions. It is attempting to redraw the map entirely, starting from the question of what a blockchain should feel like when it finally grows up. Whether it succeeds or not remains an open question. But the problem it is trying to solve is very real, and it is one that the industry can no longer afford to ignore. To truly understand why SUI is often described as different, you have to step away from surface-level comparisons. Faster block times, higher throughput, lower fees. These are outcomes, not causes. What matters is the architecture underneath, the assumptions the system makes about how users interact, how assets exist, and how transactions relate to one another. This is where SUI quietly departs from the design patterns that have defined most blockchains so far. Traditional blockchains, whether account-based or UTXO-based, share a common constraint. They treat the global state as something that must be updated in a strict linear order. Every transaction, no matter how independent it is, competes for a place in the same sequence. This creates a natural bottleneck. Even when two users are interacting with completely unrelated assets, the network still has to agree on which action came first. As demand grows, this ordering requirement becomes expensive, slow, and increasingly difficult to scale. SUI challenges this assumption at its core by shifting from an account-centric model to an object-centric one. Instead of viewing the blockchain as a single shared ledger that everyone must touch, SUI treats assets and data as distinct objects with clearly defined ownership and rules. If two transactions are operating on different objects, there is no inherent reason they need to wait for each other. This insight might sound simple, but its implications are profound. It allows the network to process many transactions in parallel without sacrificing security or consistency. This parallelism is not an optimization layered on top of the system. It is the system. From the ground up, SUI is designed to identify which transactions truly require global consensus and which do not. In many cases, transactions can be validated and finalized independently, resulting in near-instant confirmation times. The experience begins to feel less like submitting a request to a congested network and more like interacting with a responsive application. Underpinning this model is the Move programming language, originally developed for DM and refined further within the SUI ecosystem. Move is not just another smart contract language. It embodies the same object-oriented philosophy that defines SUI itself. Assets in Move are treated as first-class resources. They cannot be accidentally duplicated, destroyed, or misused unless explicitly allowed by the code. This approach dramatically reduces an entire class of vulnerabilities that have plagued smart contracts for years. What makes Move especially interesting is how it aligns developer intent with system behavior. Instead of relying on conventions and audits alone, the language enforces rules at a structural level. When a developer writes a contract in Move, they are required to think explicitly about ownership, access, and lifecycle. This creates a more disciplined development environment, one that favors correctness and safety over speed of deployment. While this may introduce a learning curve, it also sets the stage for more robust applications over time. SUI's consensus mechanism further reinforces this philosophy of efficiency without compromise. Rather than forcing every validator to participate in every decision, SUI uses a flexible approach that adapts to the nature of each transaction. Simple transfers can bypass full consensus, while more complex interactions still receive the strong guarantees needed for security. The result is a network that conserves resources by using heavy coordination only when it is truly necessary. Latency, often overlooked in favor of raw throughput, is another area where SUI's architecture shines. For many applications, especially those involving user interaction, responsiveness matters more than how many transactions a network can theoretically process per second. SUI's design minimizes the time between user action and finality, making blockchain interactions feel immediate. This subtle shift has major implications for user experience, bringing decentralized applications closer to the standards people expect from traditional software. Of course, no architectural choice is without trade-offs. SUI's model requires developers to adopt new mental frameworks and rethink how they design applications. It asks them to move beyond familiar patterns and embrace a more explicit relationship with data and ownership. For some, this will be a barrier. For others, it will be an opportunity to build systems that were previously impractical or impossible on blockchain infrastructure. What emerges from all of this is a network that doesn't merely aim to be faster, but more expressive. SUI's architecture is less about winning benchmarks and more about expanding the design space for decentralized applications. It invites developers to imagine products that behave like real-time systems rather than delayed financial instruments. And it invites users into an experience where blockchain fades into the background, replaced by interactions that feel natural and fluid. In this sense, SUI is not just offering a new technical stack. It is proposing a new relationship between users, developers, and decentralized systems, one where performance is a consequence of clarity, and scalability is a result of thoughtful design rather than constant patchwork. Whether this vision can be fully realized will depend on adoption and execution. But architecturally, SUI stands as one of the clearest attempts to rethink blockchain from first principles rather than incremental improvement. Technology on its own rarely changes the world. It becomes transformative only when people use it to build things that matter. This is where many blockchain projects stumble. They boast impressive technical specifications, yet struggle to translate those capabilities into products that resonate beyond a narrow circle of enthusiasts. When evaluating SUI, the most important question is not how fast it is, but what kind of ecosystem it enables, and whether that ecosystem can support applications with real, lasting value. SUI's architecture naturally lends itself to a different class of applications than those dominating earlier blockchain cycles. Because transactions can be processed in parallel and finalized with low latency, developers are no longer forced to design around network constraints. This freedom opens the door to experiences that feel interactive rather than transactional. Instead of waiting for confirmations or dealing with unpredictable fees, users can engage with applications that respond instantly, creating a sense of continuity that traditional blockchains often lack. One area where this becomes especially clear is gaming. Blockchain games have long promised player-owned assets and open economies, but the reality has often fallen short. Slow transaction times break immersion, while complex wallet interactions discourage mainstream players. On SUI, in-game assets can exist as objects with clear ownership and behavior, moving between players or changing state in real time. The blockchain becomes part of the game's logic rather than an external settlement layer, allowing developers to design experiences that feel complete rather than compromised. A similar dynamic applies to digital collectibles and NFTs, though SUI approaches them from a more functional perspective. Instead of treating NFTs purely as static tokens, SUI encourages the creation of dynamic objects that can evolve, interact, and carry richer data. This shifts the conversation away from speculation and toward utility. An NFT on SUI can represent a character that gains experience, a membership that changes over time, or an asset that responds to user actions. These capabilities align closely with the project's broader goal of making digital ownership more expressive and intuitive. Decentralized finance on SUI follows the same logic of rethinking first principles. Rather than simply recreating existing DeFi protocols on a new chain, SUI's environment allows for more granular control over assets and transactions. This can enable financial applications that are safer by design, with fewer hidden risks stemming from poorly defined state changes. At the same time, the network's performance characteristics make it more feasible to build consumer-facing financial tools that don't feel intimidating or slow. Beyond specific sectors, what truly defines SUI's ecosystem is its focus on developer experience. Building on SUI requires learning new concepts, but it also offers a sense of coherence that many developers find lacking elsewhere. The object model, the move language, and the execution environment all reinforce the same underlying principles. This consistency reduces cognitive overhead once the initial learning curve is overcome, allowing teams to think more clearly about how their applications should behave over time. SUI's team has also placed a strong emphasis on supporting early builders. Rather than chasing superficial metrics, the ecosystem has grown through targeted grants, developer education, and close collaboration with founding teams. This approach prioritizes depth over breadth, aiming to cultivate applications that are tightly aligned with the network's strengths. While this may result in a slower, more deliberate expansion, it also increases the likelihood that successful projects will be resilient rather than fleeting. From a user perspective, the most promising aspect of SUI's ecosystem is how little it asks from the user. Wallet interactions can be abstracted, fees can be predictable, applications can guide users without forcing them to understand the underlying mechanics. This is a subtle but crucial shift. Mass adoption will not come from teaching everyone how blockchains work. It will come from making that knowledge unnecessary for everyday use. SUI's design gives developers the tools to hide complexity without sacrificing decentralization. It is still early, and the ecosystem is far from complete. Many ideas remain experimental, and not every project will succeed. But what stands out is the sense of alignment between the network's technical foundations and the kinds of applications emerging on top of it. There is a coherence here that suggests intentional design rather than opportunistic expansion. In evaluating SUI's real-world potential, it becomes clear that its value does not lie in replacing existing systems overnight. Instead, it offers a platform for exploring what decentralized applications could look like if they were built with responsiveness, ownership, and usability as primary goals. If even a fraction of these experiments mature into widely used products, SUI's ecosystem could serve as a blueprint for a more user-centric generation of blockchain applications. Ultimately, the success of SUI's ecosystem will be measured not by the number of protocols deployed, but by the quality of experiences they deliver. And in that regard, SUI appears to be asking the right questions. Questions that move beyond speculation and toward genuine utility in a decentralized world. Every ambitious blockchain project lives at the intersection of vision and reality. SUI is no exception. While its architecture and ecosystem suggest a thoughtful approach to long-term scalability, the path from technical excellence to sustained relevance is rarely straightforward. To assess SUI's true potential, it is essential to look beyond its strengths and confront the challenges it faces in an increasingly crowded and unforgiving landscape. From a long-term perspective, SUI's greatest advantage lies in its clarity of design. Unlike projects that evolve reactively, SUI was built with a specific future in mind, one where decentralized systems support real-time, user-facing applications at scale. This gives it a strong foundation for growth as demand shifts away from purely financial use cases toward broader digital experiences. If the next wave of adoption is driven by gaming, social platforms, and interactive digital environments, SUI is structurally well-positioned to compete. However, the blockchain market does not reward good ideas in isolation. It rewards networks that achieve momentum. SUI operates in a world dominated by established ecosystems with deep liquidity, large developer communities, and entrenched user bases. Competing against these networks is not just a technical challenge, but a social and economic one. Developers often choose platforms not because they are objectively better, but because they offer faster paths to users, funding, and integration with existing tools. SUI must continually justify the cost of switching. The Move programming language, while a cornerstone of SUI's safety and performance model, exemplifies this tension. On one hand, Move provides strong guarantees and aligns well with SUI's object-centric architecture. On the other hand, it introduces friction for developers who are already fluent in more widely adopted languages. Learning Move requires time and effort, and not every team will see the long-term payoff as worth the initial investment. For SUI, the challenge is to ensure that the benefits of Move become increasingly obvious as the ecosystem matures. Token economics also play a critical role in determining long-term viability. The SUI token is central to network security, governance, and transaction fees, but it also exists within a volatile market shaped by speculation and macroeconomic forces. Price fluctuations can influence perception, developer interest, and user behavior in ways that are often disconnected from fundamentals. A strong technical foundation does not automatically translate into sustainable token value, especially during prolonged market downturns. Another risk lies in execution. Designing a scalable blockchain is one thing. Maintaining it under real-world conditions is another. As usage grows, unexpected edge cases emerge. Performance under stress, network upgrades, and governance decisions all test the resilience of the system and the team behind it. SUI's architecture reduces certain classes of problems, but it does not eliminate the need for careful coordination and transparent leadership. There is also the question of narrative. In the crypto space, perception often moves faster than reality. Projects can be dismissed or celebrated based on simplified stories that fail to capture nuance. SUI's emphasis on long-term infrastructure over short-term hype may work against it in a market that rewards visibility and immediacy. The risk is not that SUI lacks substance, but that its value proposition may be misunderstood or overlooked during periods of intense competition for attention. Despite these challenges, it would be a mistake to underestimate the compounding effect of thoughtful design. Infrastructure projects often follow nonlinear trajectories. Progress may appear slow until a tipping point is reached, at which point adoption accelerates rapidly. SUI's focus on developer experience, safety, and scalability positions it well for such a scenario, provided it can continue to attract builders who share its long-term vision. Ultimately, SUI's future will depend on alignment between its technology and its community, between its incentives and its goals, and between its vision and the evolving needs of users. The risks are real, and success is far from guaranteed. But in a space crowded with incremental variations on the same ideas, SUI stands out for its willingness to question foundational assumptions. This willingness does not promise victory, but it does create the conditions for meaningful innovation. And in an industry still searching for its most compelling use cases, that may be one of the most valuable assets a project can have. After spending enough time observing the blockchain space, a certain pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Most projects are loud at the beginning and quiet later. They arrive with bold claims, aggressive timelines, and a sense of urgency that feels almost manufactured. And then, slowly, reality sets in. Deadlines slip, narratives change, and attention moves elsewhere. Against that backdrop, SUI feels different. Not because it promises certainty, but because it seems comfortable with uncertainty. When I look at SUI, I don't see a project trying to dominate headlines. I see a team that chose to start with uncomfortable questions instead of easy answers. Questions like, what happens when blockchains are no longer used primarily for speculation? Or what kind of infrastructure is required when users expect applications to respond instantly without excuses? These are not glamorous questions, but they are the kind that matter if decentralized technology is meant to last. What resonates with me most is SUI's refusal to optimize for the present moment. In a market obsessed with short-term metrics, SUI appears to be building for an environment that doesn't fully exist yet. One where digital ownership is dynamic, where applications feel alive, and where users don't need to know or care that a blockchain is involved. That mindset requires patience, both from the builders and from those watching from the outside. I'm also drawn to the intellectual honesty behind SUI's design. It doesn't pretend that existing models are sufficient, nor does it claim to have solved every problem. Instead, it makes its trade-offs explicit. It accepts complexity where necessary and simplifies where possible. This kind of clarity is rare, especially in an industry that often blurs the line between vision and marketing. That doesn't mean I believe SUI is guaranteed to succeed. No project is. Adoption is unpredictable, markets are irrational, and superior technology does not always win. There is a real chance that SUI's ideas will be adopted elsewhere, or that its ecosystem will grow more slowly than expected. Acknowledging this uncertainty is not a weakness, it's part of taking the project seriously. What gives me cautious optimism is the feeling that SUI is aligned with where blockchain needs to go, not where it has already been. If the next phase of this industry is about building things people actually want to use, things that feel intuitive, responsive, and meaningful, then the principles behind SUI make sense. Even if SUI itself is not the final destination, it represents a step in the right direction. In that way, my interest in SUI is less about price charts or rankings and more about direction. It's about whether the industry is willing to rethink its assumptions and invest in foundations that may take years to reveal their full value. SUI, to me, is a signal that some builders are still willing to do that work. And perhaps that is the most important takeaway. SUI doesn't ask for belief, it asks for attention. It asks us to consider a future where blockchain infrastructure grows up, becomes quieter, and finally starts serving the people it was meant for. Whether SUI becomes a major player or remains a thoughtful experiment, the questions it raises will continue to matter. And in a space defined by constant noise, that kind of quiet ambition is something I find worth paying attention to.